Good morning. Today's date is 3/3/2022. And we're here at the Evansville Wartime Museum. We're going to have Mike Wicker talk briefly about the LST, the Higgins boat in the movie with Clint Eastwood. And David Coker is our main speaker today, and he's going to talk about Chrysler during World War II. He's an authority on Chrysler in Evansville, and we're fortunate to have him here. Thanks for everybody coming today. We're going to show you the crowd.
Give away an important note.
No.
Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's pledge to our country and our flag. The flag is over there, the flag is over there.
Got him everywhere.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would you bow with me for just a word of prayer? Father God, thank you for giving us this day and allowing us to be a part of it. This group of senior citizens, we call ourselves, are here to honor and recognize those who were so important in keeping us free. And it's appropriate that today we ask your special blessing on those in foreign countries that are being invaded by aggressors. We remember that. We did our share in stopping that years ago, and we thank you. So be with the blessing of those people. We ask your blessing with us. We appreciate everything that you do for us. We ask in Christ's name. Amen. So again, thank you for being here. How many of you are either veterans or spouse of veterans? Most of us. Again, thank you for being here, and our program chair and head of this whole thing, Dr. Mark Brown.
Good morning. Thank you for coming today. Appreciate all of you being here. This is our 8th monthly SWRCA EWAM. It's called Lunch, which you've had, Learn, which is next, and then the third thing is Share. So after we do this good discussion here, the share is very important too. We'd like you to bring up some of your ancestors, relatives that might have done something at Chrysler this year. I think it will be nice for everyone to hear some of those stories. So the third part's just as important as what Mr. Coker is going to say. I have to give you some things that are on our schedule that I want to tell you about, and I want to let a couple people stand in the crowd. This big machine behind you is called a P-47, and that got here to this town because of people that have been working on it for 10 years. It just came here October of last year, and its birthday was back in 44, 45. Like Mr. Casco to stand up, Mr. Buttram to stand up. Mr. Casco is the president of the P-47 Foundation, and he helped him and Mr. Buttram have fought for 10 years to get that here. It's very important for your ancestors and all of us to have a P-47 here, just like you have an LST. I've got to tell you a couple other things. This is Mike Tiemann. He's the assistant chair and director here. We have a new executive director in the back. His name is Forrest Gottman. He's waving his hand. He's a homegrown man from Mount Vernon and then University of Evansville. That's over on Lincoln Avenue. The other thing I want to say is what we have on our agenda down the future. I'm going to stand next to here Mike Tiemann, and this is called the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. This is a replica of what you find in Washington, D.C. And a month from now on 4/7/22, the same time, same station, we're going to have lunch, and then we're going to have a ritual of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. This is the 100th anniversary of this dedication. It was dedicated 11/11/21 in Washington, D.C., with 80,000 people there. Two former presidents and President Harding gave the talk. So we're going to do a ritual. It's about 18 to 20 minutes long, and it's a very moving ritual sponsored by the 40 and 8. 40 and 8 is just like the American Legion, the VFW, but very few people know about it. The next month, we're going to have a talk on the flags of our services, and that's going to be by a gentleman that's a CB named Brian Brethold, and that will be in May, and we will have all 9 flags up here and talk about the evolution of each one of our services. We had probably 3/4 of you raise your hands, so it's important for you to know the evolution of the flags that represent our different services. Now we have donation things on the tables. If you're so inclined, we'd love to have a donation. We still have to pay for that plane. We're 2/3 of the way paying for it, and we want to get a little further. Anybody you know wants to donate, we'd be glad to take that. Also, the museum will need donations in the future as well. But we're here to stay, and we're all a volunteer group, except we have 1 or 2 or 3 paid employees. Anybody in a red shirt is a volunteer, and this thing doesn't happen without volunteers. And I'd like to give all of them a hand right now. Now, before I get to our main speaker, I'll tell you about him, but I'm going to have Mike Wicker start walking up here.
No, I'll take Mike there.
Okay, you're going to take Mike too. Okay, go.
I'll speak out loud. Mike Wicker has written a book called Back to Valhalla, and he'll say a little bit about that, but I wanted to say a couple things. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, well, yeah, I didn't come here to talk about the book, but yeah, there is a book, Invitation to Valhalla, it's called. It's
In the gift shop.
based, they're set in Evansville during World War II. It's a novel, a fiction. But I wanted to just mention briefly the Higgins boat back here, the LCVP, the landing craft right behind the Thunderbolt. It was one of our LST Higgins boats, and in 2005, I was a crewman on the ship for a month. The ship was still docked in Mobile, hadn't come to Evansville permanently yet. And so we sailed it around Florida, and we sailed it up to Boston with that Higgins boat and another one on there. And in Boston, Clint Eastwood's production company, who at that time was filming Letters from Iwo Jima, and they rented those from us for $10,000, the 2 Higgins boats. They took them to Iceland. That's where that movie was filmed, because it has it's a volcanic island, it has black sand beaches just like Iwo Jima does. So they filmed it in Iceland. And one day when in rehearsals, Clint Eastwood was riding in that very boat. Kenny Adams, one of our crewmen, went to Iceland with him to be the driver in the movie. And a big wave came over and drenched Eastwood. And but he got a heck of a kick out of it. And so it's yeah. Clint Eastwood rode in that boat back there. So, but that's all I wanted to say. But it's the guy we want to hear. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. You need to read some of Mike's books. I think they're back here in our gift shop. He's an excellent writer. I think historical fiction, you'll like that. A second announcement is on March 29th of 2022, the Evansville Museum is going to, at 6 p.m., is going to sponsor a movie. It's written by produced by a Wrights High School group and directed by Mr. Carl. Mr. Carl's got the Indiana highest award for teaching that anybody can ever get. And if you see some of the things he does, you'll understand why. This is about a 16-minute movie about a lot of things, some of the things David's going to talk about today, but it talks about Evansville during World War II. Okay, thank you. That's Donna Bone, and she corrected me. It's Chrysler during World War II. but it won't be as in-depth as you're going to hear from this man right now. Now, I'm going to have David come up here in just a second, but if you think about, we have a medical school downtown, and the dean of the medical school came recently, also the president of University of Indiana University, and they were a little worried about what we're implementing here in Evansville. One of our top donors there is Bill Stone and Mary Stone, and what they're planning on doing is improving psychiatric care in Evansville, Western Indiana. It's going to be used by different places in the United States after they show how it can be done. But the dean and the president were worried about, can Evansville do this? Well, they weren't too worried, because if you watch what Evansville did, which what Mr. Coker is going to tell you, and all the things other speakers have said, and what that movie will tell you, Evansville can do it. And Evansville will show them that the genealogy of people, we have, the work ethic has not moved out of Evansville, and we're going to show the world how you can implement and improve people's psychiatric care in our area. So this is just a preface. We're not talking about that today. We're talking about David Coker, and he's going to talk about this Chrysler in Evansville. But if you look at Chrysler in Evansville, my dad would always say when they moved out in 1958, he was worried about us losing the city, collapsing, because Chrysler was so important. Here we were in a big recession in 1930s and 35. They brought that company here. And when they brought that here, it helped everybody. And he will tell you the first contract in January of 42 was Chrysler. 2 other big contracts happened after that, plus a lot of multiple contracts. And the people fulfilled. LST, they made 167 here, more than anywhere in the United States. Everybody was at the same starting point for making LSTs. Everybody was at the same starting point, but how did we make more than anyone else? How did we make more than anyone else? It shows you got organization, work ethic, and a lot of other things. So we beat them to the finish line with 167. And he's going to show you what we did at Chrysler, and it's absolutely amazing. And I've been addicted to this topic since 2005, and the problem is this addiction doesn't just leave you quickly. David Coker worked in Washington, D.C., was a publisher there for 4 years. He's been a publisher here for over 35 years. He studies things in depth, and I will tell you, he will knock the socks off of you when you hear what he's got to say. David, I can't thank you enough for coming. Come on up here.
I am honored to be here today. As many of you know, I am also a crew member of LST 325, and I would like to extend an invitation to any of you, if you would like to go on a tour sometime of the ship, talk to me afterwards, and I'll give you my phone number and so forth, and we'll make sure that we can make contact to take you on a guided tour of the landing ship tank on our waterfront. We're really happy about the new docking site. It is now located right adjacent to where Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron was once located, so I could stand there and point at it and say, that's where we built them, and tell you a little about World War II, a little about the Greek story, and a little about the Evansville story pertaining to LST. So I'm going to get back here behind my computer, and the story of that building, you'll notice here there was a caulking job being done on that smokestack right there. It was for a power plant. This factory was originally built by the Graham brothers to build trucks. They built 1.5 ton and 2-ton trucks there. Actually, they started out at the very beginning of building these little conversion units to be able to convert a Model T Ford into a 1.5 ton truck with a rudimentary cab and body. And they started making these little truck builders for $400, you can make the conversion yourself, and they sold like hotcakes. So by 1920, they decided that they were going to start building their own trucks, and this was the very first Graham Brothers speed truck. And they made a few thousand of those, and time went on, and they developed a relationship with Dodge Brothers. This is the factory. This gentleman right here, Phil Wrights, was an Evansville native that worked in the factory and built that little model of the Graham Brothers factory when they built trucks there. And I collected that from the newspaper archive. And here's an advertisement of the G-Boys. This is later, 25, 26. From Evansville to everywhere, Graham Brothers trucks. So, and here's one, Graham Farms Cheese. Who remembers the cheese factory in Elnora? Well, it was actually started in Washington, Indiana. And this little truck, if you'll see there, says Graham Farms Cheese, Washington, Indiana on the door. And this is the kind of trucks that they built at their factory. Now, Dodge bought Graham. Then there was a company, a private equity firm called Dillon and Reed that bought Dodge. And it was just strictly on a whim. They had no business being and trying to get involved in the truck business because they had no experience in that. So they owned it for about a year and a half. And enter Walter P. Chrysler, who he ultimately bought Dodge, and Dodge obviously became a division of Chrysler Motor Company. And the factory was closed for several years, from about 1930 until about 1935. There was nothing going on there. But there had been an improvement in the economy in 1935, and car sales had increased a little bit, and so they decided to come back to the old factory and start building 1935 Plymouths. And notice the price of that Plymouth was $510, which was pretty amazing at that time. So for several years they built Plymouths. There's a 39, here's a 41. And there's an aerial photograph of the factory. You can see the water tower and the smokestack there in the middle. That was for a powerhouse that the Graham Brothers had built. And this is Kaufman Thoma Keller, K.T. Keller, who was the CEO and president of Chrysler Motor. And shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack, he was in Washington, D.C. talking to some officials at the Office of Personnel Management. And as he was leaving, someone asked if Chrysler had a factory near a large body of water. He said, well, we've got a Plymouth assembly plant on the river, on the Ohio River in Evansville, Indiana. It's about 400,000 or 500,000 square feet. And the OPM man said, come with me. So he introduced him to Lieutenant Colonel Guy Drury of Army Ordnance. And Drury asked, we need between 3 and 5 billion rounds of 45 caliber cartridges. And he said, do you think you could make those? And he said, well, of course. He says, yes, absolutely. And he said, well, don't you need some kind of board supervision or board approval to do this? And he said, no. He said, we've been hearing so much about billions of this and billions of that. He said, I've never had the opportunity to build a billion anything. He said, I'd really like the opportunity to do that. So on that and a handshake with an ordnance officer in Washington, D.C. is how this story all started. And this is C.L. Jacobson, who was the general plant manager here in Evansville. And you'll see some of his photographs later on. Now, this shows all of the various different stages that a bullet has to go through from the creation of the primer, the powder, the casings, and on like that. And then the final assembly of the bullet down here in the lower right-hand corner. And it's hard to believe that so much detail is necessary in building a round of ammunition, but this is what was required. And a lot of it was inspections and making sure that everything was the way it was supposed to be. And one of the things that happened early on, when they first started, they were making bullets with brass casings. But then the War Department decided that all of the brass was too important to put into ammunition, so they were going to allocate that for electronic applications, and radios and so forth, radar and different things like that for connectors. And so they decided, they asked Chrysler if they could, and here you are, this is February of '42. They're starting to clear out all of these are spare parts. And there you are. In March of '23, that's less than 4 months after the Pearl Harbor attack, they had that factory completely cleaned out from one end to the other. They did this twice. They did it once to convert the bullet production, and then they did it again for the tank production. But we'll get to that in a minute. Now you see here, this is April 28th, and they're getting the first slug making machines, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Notice all the machines are moving to in. I want to tell you something about where all these images came from. Most of them came from an archive that was found by Ray Diekman. I don't know if you all remember, Ray Diekman used to run Ray Joe's Guns, and his son Stan inherited the business from him. And he was a night watchman at Chrysler at the end of the production line in 1959. And he found this enormous archive of photographs. And he went to his supervisors and said, do you want to move this stuff to Fenton, or what do you want to do with it? And they said, we don't want it. Go ahead, take it home. It's yours. So it's literally hundreds of photographs which have since been donated to the USI, and it's part of the USI archive now. These images that I got came from Tom Lonberg at the Evansville Museum, and apparently they were originally scanned by Harold Morgan. Yeah. Anyway, here they're moving these equipment in, and at the same time, about half a mile from the factory, down there close to where Kentucky and Indiana lumber is presently located, near the railroad tracks, they built these powder bunkers. They wanted to store the powder away from the factory, and so they brought it in here by rail, and they put it in cans. They canned it, and then the cans would be conveyed up to the factory in this enormous conveyor mechanism that they had. Here's another shot of the powder bunkers along the railroad tracks, and you can see that. You can see that conveyor. It starts right here. It goes all the way up to the plant. And they wanted to store the powder down here, and they put it in cans, and they put it on a conveyor and took that up to the main factory on an as-needed basis. Now, these are spools of slug wire. This is what the slugs that were inside the projectile were made out of. And these spools would be loaded. Now this is primer and anvil assembly. This is another aspect of making the primers for the shells. And here's the very first trainees being trained on these machines. And these were cartridge draws, but somewhere in here, we had, now this is this engineering department that I was telling you about. They worked with metallurgists from the Frankfurt ordnance plant in Philadelphia and metallurgists from Pittsburgh, where the steel was made, and they came up with an alloy that had similar mechanical principles to the brass that they were originally making these bullets out of. But in this, there were engineers here on the staff of Chrysler that helped to develop that steel alloy. Now this is a primer drying room. After they made the primers, and apparently the explosive that was in the primer was like a paste, and they would put it in the primer and then crimp it shut, and then they had to bring it into this room and they dried it. I think this room was probably heated. And you can see the cans of primers there stacked on that table. Now these are cartridge cups entering normalizing furnaces. Heat was used frequently in the development of these bullets. And this is, I'm going to have to look at my notes here. Well, I think this is with the primer and anvils. And then this is cartons. After they started making, well, at the same time that they started making these bullets, they had to package them some way. And they used this cardboard that was treated by wax. It was like thick wax paper. In fact, I have a box of ACP 345 ammunition that was built here at the Evansville Ordnance Factory. And these cartons would not hold up under certain weather conditions. And so consequently, they had to repackage some of the shells in metal cans, but I'll talk about that in a minute. This is where they're actually making the cartons and stamping them. And you will notice as we go through these pictures that there was racial stratification among the various occupations at the ordnance factory. It was a nature of, it was a product of the times, is about all you can say. Some of the local employers did not employ black people at all, but they did have minorities here at Chrysler. And of course there were lots of women as well. Now these are the metal containers. These are some of the metal containers that I was talking about before. And here they are sorting. These are 30 caliber carbine. They started out with 45, but then they developed in that same laboratory, they developed a non-corrosive primer that was necessary for 30 caliber carbine ammunition. And they went ahead and started producing the 30 caliber alongside 45 and produced them simultaneously for several months. But these people are messing with 30 caliber right here. Here's more packaging, packing and sealing. And here they are. My friend Les Bryan told me that some of the people in the factory were blind, and they could feel the cartridges as they would come through, and they could feel any imperfections in them better than sighted people. And so there were blind people that were part of the quality control of this. But these people are packaging. You can see they're setting the bullets in blocks. Now, test firing was an important part. Rounds would be randomly selected out of the production line. And the little book says, I'll be referred to as Bullets by the Billions. That's where this came from. It was a little book that was published by Chrysler in 1946. And They test fire as many as 1 million rounds of ammunition every single month. That sounds like a lot, but the truth of the matter is they produced 12,500,000 rounds every single day. Initially, ordnance, the Army said that they thought they might need 900 million, or 9 million. Then they increased it to 10, then they increased it to 12.5. And so what Chrysler did in response was they cut an agreement with Sunbeam, which made refrigerators here in Evansville, and Sunbeam ended up making 40% of these rounds that were then packaged for shipping here at the Chrysler factory. But they would test fire them out of 45 pistols, Thompson machine guns, and 30 caliber carbines. Oh, and one of the facilities that they did this test firing, the old Diamond Lanes up on Diamond Avenue, the walls of that building are 12 inches thick, solid concrete. And that was a test range for these bullets. And they test fired them in that building right there that's now a bowling alley. So here we got the metal cans. You see the women taking the cardboard containers and putting them in metal cans. This is earlier when they were still making them out of wood. Douglas MacArthur, General MacArthur in the South Pacific, he specifically requested the metal cans because these paper cartons would simply not stand up to typhoons and bad weather. And so one of the engineers, whose name was Robert Dickman, designed this machine, which is called a vacuumator. And what it did was it sealed the ammunition in metal cans that would then be opened with a metal key, like you remember how we used to open coffee cans when we were young? Well, that same, this vacuumator was patented, and he became quite wealthy after the war because many canning operations adapted the same method for canning foodstuffs and coffee and different things. This is a vacuumator that was invented right here in Evansville. Now here you see Jacobson again with 2 Army officers on the day of the 1 millionth repackaged round on August 21st, 1944. And here you see some empty boxes and others that are full for shipping. And here are some of the crates that are being marked and stickers placed on them. Control. And this is from my personal collection. That's a 30 caliber carbine at the top and a 45 pistol and the various different clips. And you see the box of ammunition and the steel cased 45 casing. Bullet. I do not have a box of 30 caliber, but I do have this box of 45. Now, in early 1944, ordnance indicated that they thought they had enough ammunition, and they wanted to convert the plant to another type of production. And so they looked around and they had these tanks and trucks that had been made early in the war. This is by probably March or April of 1944. And These trucks and tanks had been with training units here in the United States to train young soldiers how to drive them, and they decided to bring them in, totally rebuild them, and they were destined to be used in the invasion of Japan. As you recall, at the time, nobody knew anything about the Manhattan Project or the creation of the atomic bomb, and war planners were thinking that we would be a year to maybe 2 years invading the Japanese mainland, and that's where these tanks were ultimately destined to go if they were needed. So this is the very first tank that arrived for repairs in Evansville. They brought them in here on rail cars. You notice this is August 3rd, 1944. There's 32 carloads of these 35-ton tanks. They went from making a bullet that's less than a half an ounce to working on 35-ton tanks. And they brought these in here by rail. They took the engines out. These are R975-C1 Continental engines, 350 to 400 horsepower. And they would take these old engines out and put them in a designated area, storage area. These were probably rebuildable cores. And then these are the Spicer 5-speed transmissions that came out of the tanks. And they probably changed the seals and gaskets in them and probably reinstalled the transmissions back in the tanks because they would be easier to reuse. Now here's a partially disassembled tank. This is July of 44. But you can see this is the passenger compartment, and they've taken the wheels off of it and the transmissions out. These are crates of new Continental engines that would be installed in the tanks before they would put them all back together again. So that tells me that there definitely were new engines installed in these tanks before they were. Now notice this is later. This is in March of 45. Now here you see a picture of the tanks being taken apart. They take the wheels off of them. They totally disassemble the suspension systems and take the turrets off of the top. And they would weld armor plate. Here's removing a turret, or installing a modified turret. They would weld big plates of armor plate on the inside of these tanks to beef them up a little bit so that they could stand up to more powerful rounds late in the war. And then they reinstalled and here you see the treads being replaced. These are brand new treads that they would put onto the wheels, a new track. Here's another new track, and notice the little master right here and the master link right there, where the track is joined together. There'd be another one, obviously, at the end of this row. And here women are assembling wiring harnesses that would go in the tanks. Now this is a dirt track test showing the need for a shroud around the track. And here's a picture of one with a shroud partially installed. The front part's not installed here, but the back part of it. And this is out on the storage yard. This is east of the factory, in that same area where the powder bunkers were. They tore those powder bunkers and a lot of those buildings down that were down there toward Fairs Avenue and by the railroad tracks. They tore a lot of that down, and that became the test track for the tanks. more storage, waiting to be rolled in and be repaired. These are as they came from the training units. Here you see the turrets that had been taken out. And prior to welding, they would weld these big armor plates. Now these are the ones that were finished. Notice some of them do have the new skirts, the shrouds around the tops of the tracks. I'll tell you, I look at these pictures and I just marvel to think that this was done here in Evansville. Who knew this? And here's some tank drivers with some executives. They're getting ready to test drive the newly refurbished tanks. And one of these guys is Jacobson. I can't remember which one. But these are I think this may be Jacobson. But they're executives at the factory. And here's more of they're doing their solo runs. They're out there by themselves. How would you like to have tanks practicing in your backyard? Those people live with that every day. I don't think they shot them, but they, and look at the parade. I love a parade. I'd love to see a parade like that. I'd actually love to see one in Evansville. But this is an obstacle course. You can see these big trees down here that they drove over for practice purposes. And here you see the numerals on them that show what their number was. And this was the last one, 1662, the very last tank that was refurbished in Evansville. And then, since they had the assembly lines, they geared up for 6x6 Dodge cargo trucks. And these had been with training units too, and they brought them in here and totally tore them apart. Here they're waiting to be repaired. And here they are, the undercarriages are being rebuilt. Now this is a very interesting photograph. This is a bare wheel alignment rack specifically for these trucks. And notice all of the very specialized alignment tools that are on that board on the side. And they would pull those trucks up on that alignment rack and use all those various tools to line the front ends. And remember, they had differentials at both ends because they were 6x6 and all 6 wheels were driven. These are the new 6-cylinder engines that were used to rebuild the trucks. And here they are, all out there waiting to be shipped off, potentially destined for Japan. Now, they also had a manufacturing line for grousing bars. Grousing bars were like overshoes for the tracks on a Sherman tank. And I've got a picture here of these are trainers and inspectors of the metal that was going into the grousing bars. You see right here the grousing bar extended. They're like overshoes for the tracks on the tanks, and they help with ground adhesion in mud and so forth. And here's one being tested. It's a 37-inch grousing bars. They made about 2,000 of those, or 2,100. Then the last contract that Chrysler got during the war was for these incendiary bombs. They were cluster bombs. And you see, it was a big 500-pound canister that was put together with these straps. Notice this is in front of a Mitchell B-25. And this is the individual incendiary bomb. And right here in the middle, that's white phosphorus. And this is powder. So that whole thing was pretty explosive, as you can imagine. And here they are. 38 of them would go in this 500-pound canister, and then they'd be dropped. These were only made in July and August of 1945, so they probably didn't go very far. And I have this right here. This is a copy of The Invader, which was published at the, this was the weekly magazine of the Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron Shipyard. And this particular issue saluted all of the various companies that were involved in war production in Evansville. And this is how they showcased what Chrysler was doing late in the war. Now here's the production. What did we make? $3.2 billion rounds of .45 ammunition, 465 million rounds of .30 caliber carbine ammunition. They rebuilt 1,662 M4 Sherman tanks. They rebuilt 3,694 Dodge 2.5-ton 6x6 trucks. They made 2,400 of those grousing bars. Or no, wait. 2,056 grousing bar assemblies. And 101,232 incendiary bombs. The employment prior to World War II was 650 people were on the payroll at Chrysler. That peaked in September of 1943 at 12,655, went down to just under 8,000 by January of 45 and reached a low of 2,400 in late May 1945. At the peak production of ammunition, the factory was producing 12.5 million rounds every day, with a quarter of them being tracer bullets. I had to stick this image in here because Mary Danatel, my dear friend, departed friend, she was my godmother's partner for years and years, the two Marys, Mary Danatel and Mary Oakley. She drove the ambulance at Chrysler, and there she is on the passenger side front fender, so I had to stick that in there. And notice these flags over here. There's the American flag, and right underneath it is the Army-Navy E for Excellence Award, which Chrysler received in 1943. That's it. I'll be more than happy to entertain questions if you guys have anything. If I know the answer, I'll try to answer it. But
Hey, Dave,
yeah,
what did they make it out of?
I don't know. I really don't know. I know that it probably was comparable to what people made at the shipyard, and they made $1.40 an hour at the shipyard.
Repeat the question.
I got it. He was asking about the powder. Actually, that became a matter of some controversy at the very beginning, after they announced that Chrysler was going to go into ammunition production. And they actually brought people in here from other ordnance operations across the country, from that Frankfurt place up in Philadelphia and other places. And they said that all of the security protocols and safety procedures that were implemented at other ordnance factories would be in place here. And that was part of the reason that the powder was stored some distance from the manufacturing factory. And they did not have any serious explosions or fires or anything during the 3 years or so that they were producing ammunition. So it was an issue of public concern for several months, but most of those concerns were allayed by people in ordnance that worked with them.
They put some powder bunkers out where the 4-H center is
That's
now.
right. Those
was that
revetments that you see out at the 4-H Center, they actually Chrysler bought that ground. They owned that.
Did they store the ammunition or the powder out there?
Both. They had both powder and ammunition. 12,500,000 every day. What are you going to do with all that? They had to store it somewhere, and they did not want to store it there on site, which made a lot of sense. So that's why they established those bunkers up there with the earthen over the top of them.
Some of the buildings that you were describing that had 12-inch thick walls.
Yes.
Microphone's not on.
If there was an explosion, the ceiling and the roof would go up and not out.
Oh, really?
Repeat the question. Repeat the question.
Repeat the statement.
Some of those buildings that were 12-inch thick walls had collapsible ceilings and roofs, so that if there was an explosion, the explosion would go up and not out. And after the war, some of those buildings were repurposed and had brick facades put on them.
Oh, really?
We had several fires there, and what happened on the one that actually paralyzed one of the firefighters and almost killed the other, the heat in there would not go through any place but except some porous concrete blocks, and would cause those sidewalls to collapse.
But that was years later, correct? Yes, sir. Oh, really? Where was that? Was that out here right out here?
Repeat the question. David, repeat the question.
Oh, he can. I'm sorry.
Get the microphone closer. Closer.
On Morgan Avenue?
Well, it was International Steel in that area.
Garvin?
Yeah, in that Garvin Park area.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I thought it might have been what became Sunbeam Plastics out here by the airport.
No, it was.
But, it was Midtown. Okay. I did not know that. I didn't know where it was. Yes.
I'm wondering, just percentage-wise, what percentage of the ammunition then did we make for the war? About?
We made 96% of all the 45 ACP rounds that were built. Now, I don't think the statistic was that high for the .30 caliber carbine ammunition, but it was 96% of all the 45 ammunition. And mind you, this is every Tommy gun, every 45 that was carried by an officer shot that same ammunition, So when you think about how many battles were fought on how many fronts and all of the islands and all over Europe, that was a tremendous amount of ammunition. But the amazing thing is by early 1945, Ordnance said that they thought they had enough. I mean, that's what's amazing to me, is that they made the ammunition so rapidly that here the war's not even over, and Ordnance says we think we have enough to finish the war, which is really kind of an amazing thought. And how would you know? And one thing I didn't mention, at the very end there in about April of '44, it was estimated $23 million worth of equipment that had been moved into this factory here. And they took it out and shipped it to, some went to Vigo County up near Terre Haute, some of it went to the Frankfurt Arsenal in Philadelphia, and some of it went to St. Louis. It went several different places after it left here because all those facilities were still making ammunition. So it's just, when you think of it all in totality, P-47s, LSTs, ammunition, and all of the other things that were made here during the war. And at the time, the population of Evansville was only 97,000 people. That's incredible. And all of this was unskilled labor. These people did not have skills for the most part. You saw the pictures of them. They didn't have skills, and yet we were able to do all these amazing things. And I'm just, my whole life I have been humbled by what I have learned about what was done here just a few years before I was born. And I'm just thankful that we have facilities like this and the LST and others that keep these stories alive. We have to remember these stories because they're part of our heritage. Well,
Question, repeat it.
International Harvester, they were at. International Steel. Well, International Steel made the keels for all the LSTs. All 167 LSTs that were built here, the keels were built by International Steel. I don't know what else they built, but I know that they did that. Oh yeah, the Bailey built bridges, that's correct. That's,
And the steel for portable air strips.
oh yeah. Any more back there?
This gentleman's going to be the speaker in May. His name's Brian Brethold. It's asking the question. Get the microphone on.
There.
One picture in there, you showed my mom engineering department in Chrysler.
Oh, really?
Repeat it again. They didn't hear you.
In the one picture, they showed my mother at Chrysler in the engineering department. To answer one thing you had, they made approximately 78% of the 30-in-1 carbine ammunition.
Okay.
They also did consultation on the 50 caliber ammunition because they were having a problem with the primers and the sealing of it. So they did engineering work on that as well here.
I knew that, but I didn't have any photographs of the 50 caliber.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have photographs of it, but my mom worked there. She's the one that told me about this, and they actually had 50 calibers that they took out on their range in the back there and fired them.
Well, I know that there was other ammunition built in other factories in Evansville too, but I can't remember exactly what they were. But when he said International Steel, I was thinking International Harvester, and of course they are known for having made M1 Garand rifles during the Korean War.
Mr. Brethold, wait, what's that? Mr. Brethold, what percentage of the 30 carbine did we make here? Of the 30 carbine that was made for the United States.
Right.
Thank you.
78%. Yes.
In the microphone. Get the.
In the Vietnam War, they made ammunition across the Franklin Street, Whirlpool's Franklin Street plant at Arcot. They made bullets across the street from that. By the time I worked at the Franklin Street plant across the street, they were making ammunition.
I did not know that.
Huh.
Well, I thank you all so much.
No, wait, go one more. Back there, Earl, stand up. Stand up, Earl.
I'd just like to echo what Dave said before. I, like Dave, and I remember the LST 325. And folks, if you haven't seen that historic ship, we're lucky to have it in Evansville, just like the P-47. And so please get down there to see it. I guarantee you we'll take you on a great tour.